Members, the question is that the motion be agreed to. Grant Robertson.
Well, I think if anyone watching that wanted an illustration of just who it is who's playing political games with this process, they would have learned that from a nasty, patronising, graceless speech that the Deputy Prime Minister just gave. And the Green Party might choose to reflect on the tone of the speech that Mr English just gave this House and just what it is that they've created through this position today and the bill being here today, because I don't think I've heard in this House from someone in a position of being the Deputy Prime Minister a more graceless speech than the one that I've just heard then. It is, in fact, disgraceful. Mr Speaker, as other speakers have noted, the Labour Party is supporting this legislation. We're doing that because it does give more choice to people in the referendum process. The public want more choice in this process. As members of the House know, the Labour Party attempted to introduce a piece of legislation to do exactly this, to add red peak into the referendum process. Along with that, we proposed, as we have done consistently through this flag referendum process, have asked for a yes-no vote to be added first. We proposed that piece of legislation. It was rejected. Mr Speaker, we have played and attempted to play a constructive role in this process from day one. There was a cross-party group. Mr McIndoe wants to deny this, but there was a cross-party group. A cross-party group that, with the exception of one political party in this House, attempted to make a significant constitutional process one that all parties in Parliament were part of. That group wanted a yes-no vote, with the exception of the National Party. But other parties wanted a yes-no vote first. We continue to believe that that is what will give New Zealanders the choice that they are looking for. This piece of legislation contributes to more choice in this process, but the real choice that New Zealanders want, the choice that more people signed a petition for than signed for red peak, was to have a yes-no question, and that has been denied. And it is of great disappointment to the Labour Party that, as part of striking a deal to get this legislation introduced, other parties in Parliament, in particular the Green Party, will not support our SOP to have that yes-no vote. We find that extremely disappointing, Mr Speaker. But I want to take us back to how it is we find ourselves in urgency doing this legislation. Because it has been within the power of the government to move legislation exactly as they have done tonight at any point in the last few weeks. The government commands a majority in this House. At any point it could have done that. But instead, John Key has chosen to play political games. Bear in mind, it's less than a week ago that John Key said he couldn't possibly introduce exactly this legislation unless the Labour Party supported it. He said that. He said there was no way it could be done. It was impossible. That is complete nonsense and political rhetoric, Mr Speaker. But that's what John Key was saying less than a week ago. He couldn't move unless the Labour Party supported him. There's no history of that in this process. When the original legislation went through, it went through without the Labour Party voting for it, without the Green Party voting for it, in fact. So some notion that the Labour Party had to be on board with including red peak into the referendum is completely ridiculous, Mr Speaker. But this is the track record of the Prime Minister, and here I am watching 3 News tonight, and there they go, replaying from the Paul Henry show on September the 7th, the Prime Minister ruling out red peak entering the referendum, stating, "We're not going back to Parliament to change the law." That's what he said. So if anyone's playing politics here tonight, it is the National Party. They could have used an order in council to put in Red Peak. They could have done that. They chose not to do that. They could have come to this House with legislation exactly like this to include a fifth flag, which apparently will become Red Peak, although that's not actually what the law says. But they didn't. They chose not to, Mr. Speaker, because the Prime Minister was playing political games with this issue. That's the truth of it. It's been the truth of it all the way through. And we hear... Tim McIndoe says that we're playing political games. He says we're playing political games. We've had the consistent position of a yes-no referendum, haven't we, Mr. McIndoe? We've had a consistent position of a yes-no referendum. Yes, we have. We've had a consistent position of a yes-no referendum. The political game is that John Key now needs to rescue his referendum. Because the truth is, the 4 flags that were chosen by the flag consideration panel aren't going to work. He knows that. There's a TV3 poll. 70% of New Zealanders don't want to change the flag. So he's now had to come up with a way of saving his referendum. And to do that, he's adopting Red Peak. My personal view, Red Peak's far and away a better flag than any of the others that are in the referendum mix. Trevor Mallard disagrees with me, but that is far and away a better flag. I still think he's going to struggle, the Prime Minister's going to struggle to get it through a second referendum, but at least now there'll be a half-decent looking flag up against the New Zealand flag in the final referendum. Mr. Speaker, I want to now refer to another matter, and that is the question, and it's also in the Labour Party's SOP, that is the question of mandate. The question of what mandate is created out of the first referendum, of whether or not we will actually have a decent level of participation in that first referendum. This is a significant and important decision. In my view, it's a decision that we're taking in complete isolation from a broader constitutional debate that we should be having as a country. And Bill English, in his ungracious response earlier on, mentioned the fact that John Burrows had also chaired the Constitutional Review Panel. Well, the government completely ignored that piece of work. And if the government was genuinely interested in a conversation about New Zealand's future identity, then we would be talking more broadly than just the flag. Absolutely. But the flag's become the vanity project of John Key that we now have to put up with. Well, we're proposing that there does need to be more than 50% of electors returning a valid vote in Part A of the first referendum. We think that is a reasonable request, Mr. Speaker, because that means that there will be a mandate of the public. We'd rather see the yes-no vote as the easy way of dealing with that. We've got that on our SOP as well. But the government could today accept that in order to make a significant change like this, that they also accept that there needs to be a decent mandate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am very, very sad that we've ended up in the position that we've ended up in tonight. The use of urgency to do this is totally unnecessary. If the government had stopped playing political games, accepted that it wanted to put Red Peak or a fifth option in, and simply gone about the process of doing that, could have been done in the normal course of events in the last few weeks. They chose not to do that, Mr. Speaker. They chose to make this a political game. And tonight, to have the Deputy Prime Minister stand up to move the second reading of this and spend 10 minutes deciding that he was going to make this about the Labour Party, he was going to make personal insults, he was going to insult the party that's given him the piece of legislation that is now before the House, says everything New Zealanders need to know about this national government, their attitude, their arrogance, how out of touch they are, and everything New Zealanders need to know about this flag referendum process. This should be a process that New Zealanders are proud of, are proud to participate in. It's not. It's a shambles, Mr. Speaker. It's been a shambles and Jackie Dean thinks it's hilarious. It's a shambles, Mr. Speaker, because New Zealanders have not been treated with respect. They have not been given the opportunity to actually decide whether they want to change the flag. New Zealanders feel manipulated, Mr. Speaker, and it's one of the reasons why 70% of New Zealanders are opposing a flag change, because they feel like they're being manipulated by the Prime Minister who's got his vanity project underway. At least this piece of legislation will give New Zealanders more choice. They should have real choice. They aren't getting that from this government.
I call